So welcome to Teachers Teaching Teachers. It is the 27th of February, 2019, and old friends tonight, David Niguidula and Suzanne Valenza. And you guys don't know that part of what I've been doing since I saw you last is this every Wednesday night. This is show 603. So,
oh my gosh.
Yay! Congratulations.
Yeah, I guess. Anyway. Yeah, when I pass, there'll be, lots of video to show at my funeral. Anyway, Jason is here. Great. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Paul. Thank you for inviting me. It took me a little while to get a plug-in that I needed to join the Hangouts. It's been a little while.
Okay.
Turn where you guys can see me.
I love messing tech guys up. It's great.
No, it's a good thing. Keep us on our toes.
So we just said hello, and I'm Paul Ellison, and I work with the New York City Writing Project and National Writing Project here and there. And back in the 90s, was working with Suzanne Valenza and David Niguidula at University Heights. So it's great that we have old friends here, and a new friend. Jason is somebody. It is Jason, yes, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I can introduce myself.
Good. Please do that. You can start.
Yeah. My name and David. I'm halfway through your book right now, and Paul recommended it, and it's just great. So I'm really happy to be here and be on this call. And anyhow, yeah, my name's Jason Cowsill. I'm in Eugene, Oregon. I work with a company called Concentric Sky. We are the creators of Badger, an open badging platform. I'm the VP of product there. And we also are working on we worked on the Open Badges 2.0 spec, and we're fundamental in the creation of that. And then also Open Pathways. So, and I work with LRNG in the other part of my life, and that's how I know Paul. And obviously digital credentialing, pathways, and portfolios are fundamental to all of the things in my life.
Great to have you.
So there you go.
And just to mention, Christina Cantrell is hoping to join us as well. Suzanne, do you want to introduce yourself? Say everything you've done since 1992, and then, no, I'm just, where are you now? What are you up to?
So I'm an English teacher at Jericho High School, which is a suburb of the city on Long Island. And I've been there for almost 20 years. And before that, I was at University Heights, which was an alternative high school in the city, in the Bronx. And this is a very traditional high school in the suburbs, a very wealthy district, really high achieving kids. But what's been interesting is I've been able to take a lot of the stuff that we did back in those days in our alternative program and apply the same practices, and brought the whole portfolio system with me, which was at that time binders, and it's become now digital. I was doing, I don't know if Jason's familiar with the roundtables, which is how the three of us know each other, but I started with a little bit of that. But it's changed over time. There's not really the interest that we had in the alternative programs for roundtables, but I did keep the portfolios alive and got it spread around a little bit, but not as much as I'd like. But and I've recently kind of went from just a writing portfolio, because I'm an English teacher, to I have my students now actually making websites where they're branding themselves and using the websites to apply to college and jobs. And then part of their website is the writer's portfolio that they're doing for my English class.
So we could do this whole show about Suzanne's work, but we invited David, so.
Yeah, and I really want to hear about badges a little bit more, because I feel like I have a very, but we limited understanding, and that's really what I'm interested in hearing more about, so.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So David, introduce yourself a little bit.
Sure. So I'm David Niguidula, and way back when Paul is talking about, I was a researcher at the organization, the Coalition of Essential Schools, working at, I was based in Providence, still were based in Providence at Brown University at the time. And the original concept back in those early days was, how can technology be used with the concept of exhibition? And one thing that seemed like a really cool idea was seeing the interesting work that Paul and Suzanne and the whole crew was doing at University Heights around roundtables, and being able to say, how do we capture this in a way with all these new digital tools. At the time, Paul remembers this, it was technically possible to get digital video, but it involved opening up the 386 computer and putting in a video card and doing all this bizarre things.
David, I could be wrong, but I think we were actually experimenting with hyperstat cards at first. Right?
Yes.
And then this thing called the web came, and we're like, oh my God, look what we can do.
Exactly.
So,
this is predating when most schools were, just trying to convince people email wasn't a fad. So we've been at this for a while, and just my particular arc on this is the coalition physically moved. We set up our own little organization here in Rhode Island. It's called Ideas Consulting, and we have set up our own platform. In our state of Rhode Island, they saw some of the work we were doing at the state level, and starting with in 2003, which was for the class of 2008, a new requirement came in for high school diplomas. So to get a diploma from any public high school in the state, you need to have, quote, proficiency-based graduation requirements fulfilled. And those could be portfolio, senior projects, some kind of performance exams. So the work we've been doing over the last 15 years or so here has been around how do we create the systems, not just the technical systems, but the whole systems within the school. How do you get everybody on board and try to do a really comprehensive view of portfolios as a whole?
So even though Rhode Island is a relatively small place, you were working with like the whole system of Rhode Island, all the schools, or how did?
Schools, well, we did some professional development at the state level, and yes, we can get everybody in a room. There's literally 50 high schools, and all within 45 minutes, so it was possible to pull everybody physically together. However, it is a diverse group. We've got city schools and suburban schools and rural schools and different sizes and needs, and there's quite the range of folks. So the interesting phenomenon has been, what do we want our students to know and be able to do? And the thing that we learned early from University Heights and the research we did at that point, we worked with you guys in the city, and we were working with schools in Westchester and the school in Kentucky and everywhere else, is that everybody's going to need to personalize it on two levels. Obviously, this is about personalizing things for the individual student. The whole point is we know we want students to show that they meet standards, but we also want to know who they are as individual learners. And then the second level is reflecting the school and its culture and what it finds important. Some of that is, obvious things. The schools that do a lot of career and tech things, CTE type things, are going to have things along those lines. But then there are times where schools just say, we really need to focus in on our literacy skills, or we really need to talk about how students can think about problem-solving issues, or working on citizenship, or whatever are the particular skills. That's been the exciting part, is watching schools use this technology as a way to show what is really important to them. So the quick...
While you're breathing there for a second, let me allow Karen to introduce herself.
Hi. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're perfect. Go ahead.
Hi.
Where do you teach? What do you do?
I teach at Harvest Collegiate High School in Manhattan near Union Square. And we've been open for 7 years. This is our 7th. And I teach English 9th and 10th grade and advisory.
Cool. And Karen is a colleague from before also, in different ways, from the 90s at University Heights and so forth. And you brought roundtables to different schools at different places and portfolios and so forth. So just to say.
To Eastside Community High School.
So I'm not sure how to organize this. You've got to start there, David. I can say, here's what I want to say. If the four of us can say like what you want to hear from David tonight, what you want to be sure to he gets touches on, I think that might be a way to start. Is that okay? Does that make sense? I can start that by saying that my work with LRNG and all of that, and with the National Writing Project has, I think I don't want to speak for LRNG at all, but I think some of their question is, how can this stuff work in schools? Like, and when I read your book, David, and I did finish it last week. Anyway, but I mean, anyway, so I'll talk about. I'm
going to finish it, Paul.
Yeah, I know. I'm just teasing.
This is a tough crowd.
I know. Anyway, so just to say, so I'm not sure how I'm saying this question, but it's about, like, so far I can only get like one really interested teacher in each school to do the work, right? But when you describe the work, it's like whole school stuff, and I'm just wondering how that happens. I mean, that's one of the things I'm curious about. How to move beyond that one crazy teacher who does this work.
Great.
Suzanne. You don't have to say anything, but
do you want me to say what
like what do you want to make sure you get from tonight?
I feel a little reluctant, but if you all already know the whole badges thing better than I do, but that is my interest tonight, is kind of learning a little bit more about that and how that I could perhaps incorporate that into what I do now. And yeah, when David starts talking about whole school stuff, I'm interested. We don't have any of those conversations right now where I am. I'm kind of that crazy teacher doing this, and I've gotten a couple of people a little bit interested, but that's as far as it's gone.
Cool. Karen, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking I've always been interested in digital portfolios and in portfolios in general. I want to figure out how to have how to do the work online, as well as have a lot of discussion and a lot of classroom life together in person. And also how to make our work visible, our online work visible to the outside the classroom. So one thing I wish I could get tablets that are cheap and they can have a stream of images on them from the kids' Youth Voices pages, or and put them in the glass windows of my classroom so people could see them. But posting enough.
No, that's fine. The making work visible, but and when you say that, you mean both on paper and, like, I think you do, or whatever. You said it better than I'm about to.
Yeah,
Jason.
On paper and.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Well, so I'm coming at it from a different angle, and I'm going to be listening more than speaking unless things are interesting, because I'm coming from the technology side. I've spent the last 20 years of my career in education, but on the technology side. So I started out in healthcare and then in higher ed and K through 12. But so I'm listening to you guys because you're the end users, or at least one side of the end users, the learners being the other side of that, to hear about what's useful. If I were to throw out anything, some of my interests right now, and they may or may not be germane to this conversation, so David, I'll let you be the judge of that, is the idea of comprehensive learning records, lifelong learning, learning outside of the classroom, and how that might be, carried forward into life and into careers and into employment opportunities, and the learning being validated and tracked through e-transcripts and stuff like that are aspects that I'm working on outside of, the actual badging realm. It carries into portfolios, of course, with the CLR being able to include badges as well as portfolios and other verifiable mechanisms of learning. So it may not be this conversation, but it is stuff I'm interested in.
It absolutely is. CLR, though, means?
Comprehensive learning record. And I'm specifically looking at, IMS Global's efforts using the case standard right now to create a spec and a mechanism for just that. Just a standard around comprehensive learning records, or, there's another group called universal learning records. But that's the gist. Just how does this carry into life and into employment and into careers and establishing skill gaps? And, the reason we get educated is to hopefully be able to be successful in life. Hopefully.
Cool. Does that give you a place to start, David? And I did tell David before we started recording that if he started presenting, we would interrupt. So please do that. But go ahead.
No, that's great. That's very helpful. Here's what let me suggest. Let's just do a quick definition round on badges, so we know what we're talking.
Exactly what I was going to. Yeah. Well, badges and other things too. Yeah. But go ahead. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, what I'm going to attempt to do here is share a screen. So with any luck, if I click here and go to this screen.
Yep.
And I have to control it from within here. So let's reactivate this.
And David, I had a question for you as you're showing stuff with badges on. Are you using the open badges spec itself? Like, they're baked?
So these are not yet linked into the open badge. So we've developed a portfolio system, and we've added badges on top of that, and we're in the process of linking it up to the open badge API.
Last time we talked, you said by the summer you'd have it ready.
There you go, Paul. We have announced our yes.
Oh.
No, that's fine. That's absolutely our goal, and that's we're working away at that.
Cool.
But
when you say you added it on, how long ago? The badges.
The badges. We've been having conversations for about 3 years, and the technical stuff we've released over the last year and a half, 2 years, something like that. So, but
okay, you were doing quick definitions.
Yes. So the idea of a badge is just that it's a credential, and at a very generic level, essentially, it has some set of requirements and some set of criteria for whether a student has, or any kind of person, who's earning this has met them, and some kind of evidence behind them. So now what we've added to it is the concept of how can a whole school, and this gets to Suzanne's and Karen's question a bit, how does the whole school start to, and yours, Paul, start to work with this, which is you've got, the way we've structured it, for the schools we're working with, is going from the scouting model. There's 2 sets of badges. There's the required set. This is what every student should know and be able to do. And then a personal interest set. And so this is one school we work with, and you see that the students have to demonstrate in arts, health, listening, math, and so on. It doesn't have to be just subject areas. We've got independent work, habits of mind. These can be, the various expectations that are important to you as a school. And then the second row is just saying this is what this particular student is going for that is beyond those required ones. So is community service, for example, some schools that may be in the required row rather than the other. The point is just to help students get through it. And the visual is that this is just showing the progress towards those badges. That's just why you see some of them filled in to varying degrees. So you've got badges, and then you've got requirements underneath them. So an easy one is writing, and the badge here, you have to have a writing to get. This is a high school graduation badge. It could be for any level, but let's say to earn this one, you have to have proficient ones in report, procedural, persuasive, text-based, and reflective writing. So, and what I'm not going to go into right now, but is important is that the school has agreed on what makes something proficient in each of these categories, and that's where a lot of the hard work has to take place. So it's one thing to say, yeah, we want everybody to be able to write a report. Well, what does that actually mean on the ground? There are other approaches to it. It doesn't have to just be a list of entries. One thing that we're finding is a successful approach is to have sort of a combination of foundational and there's a line from Kim Carter who was talking recently. She was talking about foundational advanced things or foundational and application level ones. But for example, in math, I might need to show essential skills in the main areas of math, arithmetic, geometry, algebra, but then I need to also complete some project in one of those areas. So this particular project here, goes into a demonstration of geometry and architecture. A student has studied the Sydney Opera House, and that goes into that one. Or it could be more of a collection of work. So in arts, the school might say everybody has to do an arts badge, but you have the choice of doing it in music or theater or visual arts. And in the visual arts one, I need each of those teachers' departments may have defined what that is. So that's the sort of top level of what a badge is. Again, underneath it is the important thing of a school coming together to say, what does it mean to meet this criteria? What do each of these elements represent? And that's where some of the deeper conversations come in. And I'm going to figure out how to get back out of screen share. So
given that introduction, what are people thinking or wondering?
So why is it called a badge, and is that little graphic? I mean, what is it important about that label or that little icon, or rather than any kind of checklist or any other kind of way of keeping track of kids meeting proficiency and
yeah.
Well, that goes to Jason's point. I mean, the work of the Open Badge Initiative has been really important, I think, in establishing this level of a shareable credential. The idea that a student can earn this badge, that there's a level, that there's a kind of currency that's being generated around this concept of badges. First, as a term, it's something kids can get around easily, whether they've seen it in scouting or video games or so on. I mean, and I do think there's something important about the visual, being able to show that you're making progress towards something.
What I see is, like, in some of them, it's like a pie, like they're shaded out 3/4. Right. 1/4 is shaded out. So that means that it's not right. So we're trying to get the whole thing.
Exactly. And other folks can, we've had conversations where they want to do it as gold, silver, bronze level, or shading it like the martial arts colors, and you're moving towards a black belt and such and such. So the idea of the visual representation of this, I think, is important. But the reason,
Jason, do you have anything to add about badges?
Go ahead.
In that definition?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to what David's already talking about. The beauty of a badge, and I think it's an unfortunate name that was chosen because it came out of MacArthur Foundation and the work that was being done with the Open Badges Initiative, and it came out of the analogy of, like, the sash that Girl Scouts get, where they get the merit badge. So it came out of something that was real world. It doesn't really convey the depth of what they are. Those images aren't just images. They're not just stickers. They're actually baked with data, and that data is verifiable. And so if I share a badge with somebody, whether that be an employer or a prerequisite for a class, that could be verified as mine, to make sure that I actually did what I said I did, and links to the evidence of what I did for that are also available in there. So over time, you start building this very rich history of your learning that is more than just a certificate. Like, you get your degree from a school and it's just a degree. Like, well, what did you do to get that? And this answers that question. And what David started saying with the stackability, and you start linking these things together to create paths, is powerful. yeah, I could get deep into the technology of it, but I think that's out of scope for right now, but happy to answer any questions about it.
But that's exactly what I think we were trying to build on, was this notion of, the credential that we want to get away from is 1 year in school equals 1 year of progress. I mean, the age grading concept of, if you're 10 years old, then you should be at this point in 5th grade and so on. Part of the idea of badges, as people understand them in the real world, and kids as well, is that you go to different levels as you're ready for them. And that's a significant thing for schools to try to approach. There's a little bit more in high school than in elementary, in the sense that, I mean, for better or worse, kids move through the math curricula with less attention paid to, are you in 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade? And what happens is the math curricula then drives a lot of other things, because, even though the English classes are technically, might be split this way. If all the kids are in calculus, it gets good. Anyway, so there's a bunch of subtle things in terms of trying to think about to go back to the question about how do you move the whole school in this direction. You start with this concept of, what do we want a student to know and be able to do by the time they leave us, whether in elementary, middle, high school, or even a particular department or class. Where do we want to be at the end of the year? Defining that in terms of, what would you earn? Any terminology, I agree, has its difficult. But one thing I do like about the term badge is that we associate the word earn with them. And that you need to do something. So how do you earn this badge? How do you, what are the things that are really important for kids to take away from my year in algebra, or whatever it happens to be? So individual teachers, the pathway has been, we've asked folks to think about, what are the key things that you're asking students to do now? What are the interesting assessments, the interesting projects? If you were to ask any of your kids who were in your class last year, what do they still remember? What are the activities that... and sometimes they're the most interesting things. Sometimes they're just the biggest things. But, that starts to help schools think about the criteria differently, getting away from the grade of, I got a 74 average versus I was able to successfully complete reading, writing, listening, and speaking elements of my English or Spanish curricula, or whatever it happens to be. So that's...
David,
sure.
as I introduce or welcome Christina Cantrell, I also want to mention that it does feel important to me that a lot of badging work has happened outside of schools. So it does feel like an important... We're all schools people, so we kind of forget that. But can somebody speak to that maybe? But I think the idea is that you'd be able to earn this badge at the museum or at the library, or in an after-school program as well.
And there's a very strong program here called PASA, the Providence After School Alliance, which is doing a bunch of work with badges. And that's exactly who this group is. It's the Providence Public Library. It's the there's a place called the Rhode Island Museum of Science and Art. There's music entities. So, and there's just a general trend across, particularly high schools, but in general, about students getting credits at colleges, at even other schools. We have something here where it's called an advanced course network, where students can be earning a credit towards high school diploma X at school X, even though the course is being offered at school Y, and whether that's online or some kind of physical arrangement. So the notion of credit being the 180 days in a single classroom is breaking in a bunch of interesting ways. And I absolutely agree that the badge is, the students earning those arts badges could well have earned it from spending years of doing music lessons or doing whatever else, and may not have ever taken an actual class within the school structure itself. We're used to that. I think we're starting to see it much more in the core academic work as well, which I think is encouraging, because if I can finagle an internship being a reporter at for a website, why shouldn't that count towards my English credit?
But could I problematize that a little bit, given so the process that you started describing, and you describe in so much more detail in your book, but about that working together in a school with faculty working together, establishing rubrics together, et cetera, feels like, where's the bridge between that and the out-of-school programs?
At the moment, so there's a couple things around badges that are important. One is credibility, and for better or worse, there's a bunch of folks who are out there, issuing badges. And one of the questions that always comes up is, how do I believe in this badge? Now, part of it, as Jason mentioned, is the fact that you can actually dig deeper and see the evidence behind it, and that's really important.
As long as you're willing to click 12 times and get there. I mean,
well, exactly.
Yeah, sorry. Did you want to address that question, Jason? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that the open badges spec, and not many people are doing that yet, but does support the idea of endorsements. It does speak to that. It hasn't been utilized to the degree that I think it should be. And Badger, our own product, is still lagging behind on that too. We're thinking it's a problem that needs to be solved. But David, did you have ideas around that? It sounded like you were heading somewhere.
Well, the idea is that as a school, we're establishing graduation criteria. So what does it mean for our school? Not worrying about anybody else's. We have to pay attention to our district or our state requirements, but basically, what do we at University Heights or Pontiac High School or Central High or whoever else, what does it mean for us for a student to have this diploma? And that's where the school has to come together as a community to try to address this on, first the top level. What are those required elements? And once we say, okay, every student should have demonstrated math, what are the actual assignments that are going to be considered, the term we've used for years is portfolio worthy, and now we can call them badge worthy. To take an example, a lot of schools have had kids do some kind of digital presentation, and which is great. They learn some new technology, whether that's, the old days it was PowerPoint, then they moved to Prezi, now they've got all sorts of multimedia things. And if you're focusing on the technical skill of it, that's great. But if it's a science presentation and I've got the physics all wrong, that's not necessarily a portfolio worthy assignment. So we want to be able to be clear what that is. So to get back to the point, if a school establishes this is what is a good criteria, then we can start to take the things from the outside and say, okay, so you had this interesting experience at the Museum of Science. What does this meet our criteria here for a relevant science project or a inquiry into something or other? And when the rubrics are done well, which takes quite a bit of doing, this is not something that's simple, but but we try to put some examples in the book. When you get to that point, then you're, as a school, you have the confidence that you can say, yes, this student participated in this outside program, they did X, Y, and Z, and here is how it relates to our definition by our badge, by our rubric of what is a demonstration of proficiency, competency, mastery, whatever the... I use those terms pretty interchangeably, so I know some people make the distinctions among those three, but for purposes of this, whatever your level of expectation is, that's what we're aiming at.
I want to make sure Christina Cantrell gets in here. We talked earlier, and one of the things Christina said that she wanted to hear more about what it means to make portfolio-worthy assignments, or projects?
Yeah.
But speak for yourself.
Great. Hi, I'm Christina from the National Writing Project. Really sorry to be late. Nice to meet you, David, and hello, everyone else. I have just picking up on what you were talking about there, David. I was interested in just, and this, I didn't really get to read the book, so I looked at the first chapter, so, but I have it now, so I will read it. But I just was wondering if this, also the sort of idea of like, how do kids find, so instead of just, you know, like the kids who get the internships outside of schools, in your context, have you developed also pathways for kids to find sort of badge-worthy outside of school pieces? And this might take us off into a different direction, so we don't have to go too far down that path. But I was just sort of thinking about, you know, how does a school kind of manage that if some kids have all these sort of out of school, after school time activities, and some kids have less access to those or have jobs or, you know, just have a different priorities after school, and how that would play into this mix.
So, okay, that's a good question. So in our work, you know, a lot of the work, like we said, was around building out a proficiency-based high school diploma.
Yeah.
So it had to be fair to all the students. And the schools we've worked with schools all over the place, you know, but specifically here in Rhode Island, where there was a graduation requirement attached to it, it had to be possible for a student to complete everything within the context of their regular classes.
Right. Okay.
So, you know, they didn't, any opportunity that came from the outside, you know, it still, at least you needed to be able to complete everything
in school
within that. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, having said that, a lot of schools have done a bunch of interesting work. There's a lot of schools that do senior projects of one kind or another. Mm-hmm. And schools in cities, it's sometimes just physically easier to get kids to mentors and so on than in rural areas where the kids aren't driving yet, and you know, they need to and so sometimes they work with virtual opportunities and so on. So yes, the gap in what's possible for kids obviously varies a lot in terms of what's and it's not just always what's physically possible, but what's available to the students. You know, do students even know? Sometimes, you know, they have things that aren't necessarily visible to them. But I think that the conversation within the school has been helpful for kids, because when they see the badges and they know, I need to earn, for example, a badge in independent work, which is often, I need to create my own project of some kind or another, and it has to be something, a problem, often they'll attach it to some problem that's of local or state relevance. Then if that criteria established in the school, and even if they have examples from in-school stuff, that makes it a little easier when they're going to the outside and saying, you know, here's stuff that's going on. I'm thinking of one place where you know, they wanted to make the school more energy efficient, you know, add some different kinds of criteria to that. So that's not inherently in a school project, but the criteria for school projects existing within the school made it easier for kids to establish that stuff for outside. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Very interesting. Yeah, thanks.
And frankly, you know, to get to the conversation about, you know, how do you get the whole school involved? You start with what they know. I mean, you know, you can, it's, you know, the folks represented here, you know, you guys have all been pushing envelopes and doing a whole lot of things, and that's great. And we need that out there. And then we also have a lot of teachers who are very, they're new to the profession, or they're just sort of, you know, they've been, you know, really working to master what they have. If we start with getting them to be good at what they do, and even in the context of what's there. So often the biggest thing we'll do in a school is ask everybody to identify 2 or 3 tasks that they feel particularly proud of, or that as teachers.
Yeah.
You know, what are the things that you'd want kids to walk away with? And build off of that. You know, try to enhance that. A lot of the conversations we have really fascinating ones in the schools have been roundtable conversations within faculty, different kinds of learning conversations where they have criteria in front of them. What makes a good task? And if you do some good cross-pollination, get the science teachers to talk with the art department or vice versa. And it's not about being a subject matter expert. It's about saying, well, you say you want kids to have this experience. Given what you've told us about what the kids do and what we are looking at in the actual student work, if we want to make this a portfolio-worthy task, a badge-worthy task, here is some things that might be able to help you. And those are often the most significant conversations within a school.
Mm-hmm. How do you keep students, so again, what you showed us earlier, how long does it take for a kid to get a badge? How do you keep a kid motivated? You know, especially underachievers, let's say, who will, you know, can't wait too long to feel that earn factor you were talking about.
Right. That's part of the reason for having the pie chart version of the badge, you know, to show some kind of partial growth on it. Mm-hmm. And again, another way to do that is bronze, silver, gold, or some other layering of that. Mm-hmm. Because we did have schools that started off by saying, here's the graduation level expectations, and then kids were going through 9th grade looking at the rubrics and, you know, scoring ones on them, and teachers saying, oh, that's okay, you're not at a graduate. And it's like, well, kids don't want to hear that. They're at a 1 out of 4 or whatever. So part of it is just help with the structure of how we give feedback to kids. Mm-hmm. Do you structure the rubrics? I mean, part of the so that you say, you know, here's what's expected, but also providing that scaffolding, and that gets to some deep conversations. You know, what are the components that we'd be looking for along the line? Yes, students should be earning something.
Yeah, they need some form of achievement or some feeling of achievement.
Exactly.
Right, before the end game.
And then again, the usual number has been 3 or 4 tasks, opportunities in any given school year to do something that would earn a badge, whether that's a single project or a collection of things or something like that. So as a number, if they're feeling like every quarter I've got something that I can point to that is on my way, you know, that I can show that I've made progress. That seems to be a reasonable point at which to do that.
So are they also then doing things that aren't necessarily going toward a badge? Like, you know, that isn't maybe a project, or that isn't.
Well, there's the common sports analogy is, you know, you do practice, you go to a lot of practices, and sometimes you spend, you know, whatever time working on your jump, you know, and your free throws. Yeah. And that's all practice. And it's the games that ultimately matter. So you're going to do, I mean, nobody's suggesting that there is no space for doing any kind of drill work. You know, you do need to practice some things, and sometimes repetitively. You know, you can make them interesting or whatever, but it's not part of the reason. Again, we talk about just having 3 or 4 tasks per year is to say not every task has to be a full. You know, teachers often feel that, you know, these are our best tasks. And they take a lot of effort. I don't make every task like that.
Okay.
You went with that direction from Suzanne's question. I'm wondering if, Suzanne, you were asking, and this is in your book, that sometimes youth can do things and then say, I want a badge for this, right? Like,
or why am I doing this if it doesn't get me a badge? You know, I remember that.
Okay. I thought you were asking. Well, let me ask.
We're like,
I thought you were. Sorry, go ahead, Suzanne.
No, just that I remember. And you know, now I'm working with a real small group of kind of alternative kids within the traditional school I'm in, who need a lot more feeling of, why am I doing this? What is this getting me? Am I moving toward my end goal of graduating? And I worry that, so I was just, again, in my needing to understand the whole badge thing, is it something that a ninth grader feels like I'm making progress now? And I think you've answered that. So, yeah.
In the book a lot, and I actually love by the, what I remember most is the end of the book, which is that digital portfolios are about conversation.
Yes.
And that's weaved throughout the whole book. So it's not like you're just doing this work to make get a badge. You're doing it to get a badge to show to an audience, right? And that audience in mind feels like an essential piece of the work. Is that?
Yeah, we discovered that early on, with the work with you all at University Heights and the early portfolio things, is that the most important component of any of this was the feedback that students got, much more than any specific platform.
Yeah.
Whatever the criteria is, students need to feel, if I'm going to put the effort in to make a portfolio, to do the work towards a badge, I need somebody to come back to me and not just give me a check plus, or say, approved and go on. Sort of like, yeah, they do need, they do want the approval, but they're also, what is it that you liked about it? What was good? What was, Jason, I love the thing about concentric circles. I remember writing years ago about this, is that the most intense circle is the teacher to student, that conversation there. But then you go to the next levels of the teachers talking with each other and with the administrators, and then you build it out to the community, and sort of all of that. Those are conversations about, what are we valuing? What is valuable? What is good enough?
Yeah.
And what's worth spending time on? And so I thought it was important to have this chapter on school culture and what are the types of things that you want to be able to do, because the technology is going to come and go. We've seen this over that last set of over these many years, but what we know is true about what's important about schooling is a student saying, I've done this work. Is this meeting the expectation? I mean, in the best sense of the word, not in the, have I met the numeric criteria, but have I, what does my teacher expect of me? What does my school or district expect of me? And am I meeting, what do I expect of myself? I do want to throw one other thing out there. Increasingly, kids are being able to create their own tasks.
Yeah, I want to hear about that too.
Yeah.
So again, having that criteria in front of them, having ideas of, the models of what is a good, what's a worthy task, allows students to then think more deeply about what are the kinds of things they want to do. So the student particularly interested in aquaculture and marine biology in a school that doesn't necessarily have a lot of offerings from that can still go to a science teacher and say, I want to pursue something in this area. And if the teacher is good about saying, well, here's what a good scientific inquiry looks like. So they can give the kids the tools to be able to develop a worthwhile task if the teachers themselves have thought it through.
David, I wanted to just ask, when you were talking earlier, you said that, you sort of painted a picture of the teachers working together as a professional community, and you said that they were looking at the student work that youth were producing. And so I'm just wondering about, this idea of portfolio worthy. This looking at student work seems like an important part of what you said in my mind, that actually you're looking at what the kids are producing and you're sort of talking about it. Can you talk about sort of what that process looks like and how you get to this idea, or what you're looking for in something that's portfolio worthy?
Sure. So there's a lot of folks who've done variations of this. So two that come to mind. One is a kind of task review. Mm-hmm. And the idea there is, teachers work in small groups, and there's protocols for this, and essentially you come in. There's a bunch of different ones, tuning protocol, whatever. But the essential idea is that each teacher would bring a candidate task to this group and say, here's the task I offer, here's how I assess it, here's a few pieces of student work, shares it with their colleagues, and given these criteria about what makes a good task, they get feedback on it. And presumably this is a round robin type of thing where everybody is both a presenter and a recipient at different points. The other one that's very useful is the idea of a calibration exercise, where in this case what we're doing is a task has already been offered, and this is coming from a lot of the assessment work, and they've been using it in things like the AP Studio, Art Studio work, and so on. But basically, lots of the writing exams, what you're doing is taking a single task. Let's make it simple. Let's say it's a essay, an argumentative essay. So we, as the whole English department, have agreed to offer the same task. So we each have our pile of 100 and whatever kids. So they were together as a group of 5 English teachers. We'll each pull, say, one sample, typically from the middle of the pack. The obvious extremes, if you've got the budding Shakespeare or in your class, sure, everybody's going to give that a top mark. But we're looking for the one sort of in the middle. What happens in the calibration is we all score it using a common rubric. So here's our rubric for argumentative essay. We're all bringing one piece to the table. All 5 of us score these 5 pieces, and there's a protocol for that. And essentially, we come to a collective judgment. Does this meet a 1, 2, 3, 4, if that's our scale, or whatever? How, which of these are there? That conversation is also very helpful to getting at what is the level of expectation.
Okay, great, thanks.
So this may be a funny turn in the last 5 minutes, but Suzanne, do you want to try to show some work quickly?
Only if the group feels that that's something that they want to do. I mean, there was.
Is that okay?
I'd love to see it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now
I meant to say that 10 minutes ago, and then things get going. Yeah. So
let's see if I can,
you're not dealing with badges yet, but you said earlier something about branding and
yeah. So
it's hard to talk and share your screen at the same time, so I'll keep talking while you're doing that. We'll see.
Okay, is it up?
Not yet.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So
Google's up. Yep.
Can everybody see that?
The Google screen is up.
There's a student name and friends, family, adventure, happiness.
No, that's not there yet.
Nope, it's Google search.
Oh, so you just need to.
Sorry.
It's okay. Jordan's up there in a different tab. Is that what you needed?
Does that have it?
Just need to click the tab.
I am in that tab, but I have a feeling I messed up.
Maybe you're sharing the wrong.
Try it again.
Okay.
Okay, I'm back here.
We've been practicing this, honestly.
I know, right? So I would not get a badge right now.
Yes, you would.
Night.
You would, but it would just have a little.
Yeah.
We just need to build rubrics into badges.
Let's see.
Okay.
I think it's this one. Share that. That's it.
There you go.
Hey.
Nice.
Hey. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Friends, family, adventure, happiness. Yeah.
Right. So
Can you hold on it so it stays? Okay. So
I did.
Okay.
Yep. Oh, yep.
all right. Now I can navigate around her site. So this is the websites I'm doing with my seniors in a creative writing class. So it's one of the 4. So this is their senior level English class. They choose to take one of 4 courses they can take. And so originally it was only the writer's portfolio, and I've expanded this in the last couple of years because when the alumni were coming back and having a daughter who just went into tech and was just graduated from college a year or 2 ago, kids are being asked not just for a resume anymore, but what's your website? So I expanded this idea of the portfolio into a whole website, and I have a whole conversation, and we read some material about branding oneself, and it's all aimed, for me at least, for kids to take back control of their online identity. So we do a lot of work with looking at what their lives look like online, because so social media doesn't define them fully, and this is their way of taking it back. And their audience is pretty much colleges. And just this year, I think it's the SUNY application does ask if a student has a personal website, they can put this in. So I do have a couple of kids who are actually using it to apply to colleges this year. But is not taken off completely yet. But more and more schools are looking at it, but they're still stuck back in their old ways as well.
Can you give us more of a tour of this one?
So this is her homepage, and this is where they have to put their brand. All right, and they're about me. I'm going to go fast through this, and then I require a resume page. And are you seeing all this?
Yep.
Okay. So this is and a lot of kids already have these ready for their college application. So that's not. And then I require an inspirations page, things that or people or whatever inspires them. All right, and this child has, a favorite teacher, her coach actually, and some quotes. And then they let me get back up here. These three, the bucket list, the food gallery, and the crystal moments. Then I say you have to come up with 3 pages that define you. So she has a bucket list, which turns into a gallery that you can go through, and it's all the things she'd like to do before she dies. It's too old. Let me get out of that and get back. A lot of kids are foodies nowadays, and their Instagrams, and they have so many pictures of food. I love this one, her crystal moments. It's her life, the special moments of her life, and she did it as an image gallery. And then we go to the writer's portfolio, and this will be a collection of all of the major projects that we do in our class. So she's got 2 projects up, a third is going up tomorrow and Friday, but the creative nonfiction is like the beginning of the year, and they do a 6-word memoir. They write a personal essay. I love this assignment that's coming up. Can you see it now? The Encyclopedia of My Life. And they make these little kind of digital books about their life alphabetically, like an encyclopedia. And this is also one of those essays turns into their college essay. And then the food unit we've done, is just different ways we write about food and looking at our lives food first. So they do another 6-word food memoir. They do a food still life. We spend a lot of time on still life, and then they compose their own important foods, and they talk about all the symbolism and the meaning of that in the writing. And then they write a food memoir. And we did a poem, and then they do a food memoir, and then their reflections on these projects are in there too. And what they, talking about what they learned about writing, about themselves, and that kind of thing. And again, we grow this over the course of the year. The writer's portfolio now will grow. These pages will pretty much stay static unless it's a page that they have particular, movement in, or these 3 pages are very different for different kids. So just really quickly, why I'm so interested in this whole idea of a badge is I'm thinking, well, how could I, connect that to achievement or to, so that's right now it's a very traditional high school, and these kids are high achieving kids. They'll do anything for a grade. So that's really all we're doing now is grade. I do have a rubric for each thing, but I'd like this idea of kind of having more of a community discussion about what a good page looks like, what should be on those pages. Pretty much between them and me, not as much of a community as Kieran, you were mentioning earlier. So that's it so far, but I don't know if that's...
Given the high achieving student, maybe badges are about understanding what's meaningful in that grade. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, you have a 4.0, but what's it mean to you? I don't know. I'm just...
Can I throw something out?
Yeah, please, David.
So, no, this is great. And one of the interesting dynamics is this organization called the Coalition for Access, Affordability, and Success, which is colleges. It's about 140 or so colleges across the country that are, and it's many of the high-end schools. And you mentioned SUNY. Part of the reason that they've put this in is because they're a member of this, because it's about half of this flagship university. Anyway, they've all essentially set up this space called the virtual locker, where students can start to accumulate things that they can perhaps use in their application, depending on the particular schools. It's in its very early stages. I think this is just the second or third cycle that they've gone through on it. Now, communities are often motivated by this kind of college work. One of the interesting dynamics I think that we're just beginning to see play out is what should be in there? What would make sense for that kind of audience? So a community can sometimes, the highly driven ones will, they see high school as a means to college, which is fine. That you're not going to inherently change that. We can argue the pluses or minuses of that. But the notion of taking that conversation's happening anyway and talking about, all right, what would you distill down? Now, the downside of that is the admissions process. We've been having conversations with the folks in that organization. They might have 90 seconds to look at a kid's work.
Wow.
So,
Right.
So how do you represent that? Part of the reason of the badge that's attractive is there is a visual quick glance at something, and you can be establishing that criteria. So that, again, yet to be defined. So there's some combination of signaling this student, earned something, or this was important, and whatever else. But then also, what do you do in that? If you've got that attention for that amount of time, what does the student select out of an interesting thing? So you don't want it to drive it too much, because I think you're having the kids do some really interesting work in terms of putting that together, self-reflecting. How do you?
Yeah, it is nice.
But that might be a motivator.
Right.
Suzanne, you need to stop sharing.
Okay.
Yeah. So we can
We're
say
seeing
goodbye.
ourselves in duplicate.
Great. But David, you were making exactly the point. You made it better than I did, but that's a real, like, how to keep these things rich and then think about that 90-second moment at the same time is a good trick. Yeah.
Well, I think it's the collect, select, reflect thing is that, right here, we've got right next to each other, we have Brown, we've got Rhode Island School of Design, we've got Johnson and Wales, which does a lot of interesting work in hotel management and culinary and other things. We've got, the University of Rhode Island, literally almost all within, blocks of each other. And, the students here know that you're going to show different things to each of those different places. So there's nothing wrong with my high school version, the version of what you just showed, Suzanne, of having a bunch of the different things, and the 90 seconds that I'm going to select for the different colleges can vary. So,
and then you find that those colleges will take a look at this kind of thing, because we had Harvard come, all right, and talk to us about, our letters of recommendation and various things. And I asked them, I said, would you look at a portfolio? And they said, no, they don't have time. They've been so few, and they're very stuck in their traditional applications, the way they've always done them. So
my conversation with those folks directly with admissions people is they aren't going to look at them across the board. They're not going to guarantee that. But the kids who are in the gray area for whatever reason.
That's true. Maybe
those. Here's the way that we understand admissions to work is an admissions counselor wants to make an argument for a particular student. They've got to be able, they work in committees, especially the higher end, most selective schools. So somebody in that office has to be able to make the argument why this student, and typically the traditional measures won't be enough to differentiate.
Right.
So,
yeah, absolutely. Right.
So they may be.
I wanted
Just to
to
point
add-
out, we're back to conversation, right? We're back to people
Yes.
talking to
Oh,
each other
yes.
about work.
Exactly.
Yeah. But just, yeah.
Additionally, I am on.
Go ahead, Jason.
The other interesting thing is where. What do I
I
get?
just want to. We need to be closing out, but
Oh.
go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, just
Keep
to
going.
throw this out there, where some of this is heading is that it's also, once we start utilizing digital credentialing and the CLR idea of a comprehensive learning record and pathways, and credential maps and frameworks, these things become machine readable. They are machine readable by their nature. So so maybe somebody wouldn't go to a URL to look at a portfolio, but having a badge that is using that portfolio as evidence could be part of a learning record that then could be parsed and read by Harvard or anybody else, anybody that has that, using the case standard or something similar. So I won't
somehow what Suzanne was showing could be machine readable.
The link, well, certainly the badge that would represent that. So that portfolio, that website, or some component, any number of components from it could be the evidence for a badge award. That badge then that metadata is machine readable. So a human would still, if they're interested in that portfolio, would still have to go click on that link. But
to get in to see the actual piece of work, you mean, right?
Correct. But the actual admission process, the job resume process stops becoming, resumes, for example, are usually keyword searched right now, and it's terrible. That becomes a verifiable mechanism that you can actually start filtering people on. So.
Suzanne, just to say, you did tell the story about Harvard just now, but you also told the story about your daughter coming back and saying they want to see websites, right?
Those are for jobs.
So that's the world we live in, somewhere between those.
Right.
For jobs.
Starting to, for me, I think that building a website in high school is a really good habit. That this, in trying to stay relevant, I think it's at least an initial experience for kids who are probably going to go into college and in the next couple of years really need to put their lives online, or, in that way, in whatever fields they're going into. So I also think, and they eat it up. I have to tell you, like I have them eating out of my, they love this unit, and they take it very seriously. So that's another really important thing. Well,
I'm glad we took the time to go there, and there are 5 more you could show us, right? But will you come back and show us again? We should, yeah.
This was great. I'm really happy to have been part of this.
Yeah, let's continue these conversations. Everyone finish reading David's book.
Yeah. Thanks, David.
Thank you, David.
No, appreciate that. And this is, I think, Paul said it, it's a conversation, and this is, it's all we started talking about this 30 years ago or whatever the number is at this point. We're not done yet, so there's plenty more to talk through. But this has been great. Really appreciate everybody's contributions.
Cool. And Karen, I haven't forgotten, part of your what you want to make visual is to the rest of your school. So your kids, so audience isn't just, Harvard. It's also, the other English teacher down the hallway so lots of things we could talk about.
And growing an interest in, growing, how do you grow a community of teachers who are going to be talking about this and wanting to make it happen in their class?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, I'm going to arbitrarily cut us off.
All right.
Thank you all for this time that you've given us.
Thank you for hosting, Paul.
Yes, thank you.
And come on back next time I invite you. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.